I was just trying to survive, to physically survive and get out of that house. And then once I got out, it ended up being 10 years before I could get an actual divorce, but it was years of threatening text messages, harassing, hacking into my online email, Facebook, all this stuff. He applied for credit in my name. He literally tried to ruin my life. I was getting death threats.
Welcome back. I'm your host, Stacey Urig, and this is going to be part 2 with Carleen Middlestead. Now, if you didn't hear my first interview with Carleen, you got to go into the show notes and go back and find part 1 of this interview. Where we left off the interview was where Carleen was sharing with us that she was about to end a 9-month marriage to somebody who had really manipulated her, actually had been found out to be a criminal, and where that led her to today. Now, that's not the only part of the story. The whole lead up to that story is even juicier and much more worth listening to. So you got to go back and listen to the part 1. But Carleen, the last time you and I spoke, you were literally going to your wedding. The arch was falling. You showed up late. The universe was giving you signs. This was a manipulative, psychologically coercive, controlling relationship that everyone had bought into, except you were a little suspicious. It didn't feel right to you. So what happens? Let's pick up right at that wedding day. What happens there? How do you know you need to end this marriage?
Yeah, the 9 months of marriage were hell. It was just a ramp up from pre-married life. Things just kind of escalated more and more. And it wasn't until he was actually physically abusive to one of our dogs. And it was that moment, that is what it took for me to say, oh no, this can't go on.
So now I just want to ask you, I don't mean to interrupt you, but it's so important. In our first episode, you talked about how he had very strategically and intentionally created an ecosystem where everyone else in your family was bought into this relationship hard. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons why they were bought into this relationship hard is because when you were much younger, you came out as gay. They're like, you don't really know what you're talking about. You knew exactly what you were talking about. Your reality was kind of being denied. And they just were so happy that you had finally, I'm going to put in quotes, come around.
Yeah.
And did the normal thing. So what was that like, having to go back to this ecosystem, this family support system, where for the first time you felt finally that you belonged and fit in, to have to say to them, this is not a good situation?
Yeah, it was really hard because I had to come clean with what had been going on, because I didn't tell anybody how awful it was. I didn't tell anybody. I still at this point don't know that he's a convicted criminal. So I had to really, and I still tried to protect him. I said, don't be mad at him. It's just not working out. We're not a good fit. I tried all this stuff. And I remember my dad saying, are you sure you don't want to give him another chance? Because it was more important for my dad to have a successful, quote unquote, successful child, by me being married to a man and staying married and having kids shows the world that he was a successful parent, I think is what it came down to. And, I was like, yeah, I'm sure. And, then I found out about the criminal charges, and his family that told me were like, well, we asked him if you knew, and he said yes. And
But when you recognized in your heart this was not going to work, did you go to him first?
To my husband?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, we had a lot of conversations and fights about, what our expectations of marriage were. And no matter what I did, I would come up short, like, because he's, he was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. And I think getting to the altar was almost like a trophy for him, and gave him just more permission to be more abusive. And so, we hadn't really talked about separating until that moment, that night. It was like a June 19th. And I just said, like, I gotta go. This isn't gonna work. And, that really cracked open his facade, and the real him just like poured out.
And what did that look like?
I mean, including like starting with the night of, he, ripped my ring off my hand and threw it. He broke a glass picture frame. He literally, it's like a switch flipped, and he just became this like other person where he was, I think, teetering on his real self and his facade. And, he was trying to break down the bedroom door, and I had never been in this type of dynamic with him. And I remember saying, like, I'm just going to pack a bag and go. I'm just going to take the dogs. Like, we just need a night. And I just went into survival mode of trying to appease him. And he was like, I think I just need a hug. And I was like, okay, I don't feel like I want to hug you right now. And then he'd start crying. And then, he went into this whole spiral of, okay, but when your grandma dies, because she was kind of sick, you have to call me. I need to be there. And I was like, of course, I was just trying to survive, to physically survive and get out of that house. And then once I got out, it ended up being 10 years before I could get an actual divorce, but it was years of threatening text messages, harassing, hacking into my online email, Facebook, all this stuff. He applied for credit in my name. He literally tried to ruin my life. I was getting death threats, and he had more experience in getting away with this. He knew that exact line that he could stick to not get caught. If he was probably 27 when I left him. He probably had 17 years of building his, personality, or building his ability to get away with things. And most cops don't have that kind of experience in law enforcement, so he really was like better equipped at how to get away with what he was doing. And through all that, like, I moved a bunch, I had restraining orders, he would find out where I was living. And through all that, I remember thinking, like, oh, I'm just going to like look at dating online. Like, I'll just take a look. And one of the first questions is, are you a male or female? Are you interested in male or females? And I hesitated. And that was kind of the first time I gave myself permission to really like think on it and think about what selection I would make. And I think I selected male. And then I think I created like another one using a totally different email address to select females and see what's out there. And that kind of like cracked open my facade of maybe being more open to exploring what that might look like.
And we had spoken in our initial interview about, being accepted within your family of origin. So the question I have before we get into this next phase of your life is, as this whole relationship implodes and unravels, and it's not as though he was becoming anything, he was unbecoming the whole facade he had been holding up, right? And now you're really seeing the truth self. How did that affect your relationship with your family of origin, with your parents, with your sister?
I think it didn't really, I think my family didn't know what to do with me, and they were shocked because I had not told them anything that was going on up until the moment I left. And even then I sort of danced around the truth for a while. And I think they just kind of didn't know what to do with me and didn't know where to fit me in the family dynamic, because my sister was now having kids, and, both my parents were remarried, and,
But did
I
they
just,
see this continued abuse and try to control of you?
yeah. And I think so my mom was very distraught about the whole thing, but didn't really know how to help me. And I think that probably comes from, I think there was probably some narcissistic abuse from my dad towards my mother. I think it was maybe triggering. And my dad struggled to sort of be this bravado dad. He would come to all the court dates, but it was more, his reaction was more, he wanted kind of the juicy gossip, and he
But
wanted
he
to,
wasn't now. But you remember at the beginning, he was like, "Are you sure?" Like,
yeah.
please tell me that faded. And he was like, "Yeah, you made the right decision."
Yeah, he never told me I made the right decision, but he didn't even take on this protective role as much as he took on a bully role to my ex. He sort of like got this power trip of intimidating him and showing up to court. It was
Understood.
less about showing up to court to support me and more about showing up to court to feed his own male ego.
It's fascinating. So,
Yeah.
fast forward, we now have double profiles in an online dating space.
Yeah.
One for chicks and one for dudes.
Yeah.
Where does this go?
Yeah. So at the same time as this, I decide to blow all my money and get a personal trainer. And I just like walked into a gym and I said, I need to sign up with a personal trainer. And it was very impulsive. And the only trainer available was a very like butch lesbian. And I was instantly like, oh, like nervous, and like her smile was so great and she was so funny and we hit it off, and we had this chemistry. And so I signed up for all this training, and I remember thinking I have to find a way to tell her that one time I dated a girl. I wasn't out yet. I wasn't a lesbian, but I just needed her to know that I wasn't this just like divorcee straight woman. And I think I had some very pathetic, story that I was sharing where I casually dropped that I had slept with a girl before. And, that kind of escalated our flirting. And then I always joke that like my worst decision was then getting entangled into a complicated relationship with my personal trainer. But she really like brought out, she really like gave me that same feeling that I had with, my first girlfriend when I was 14. And I instantly like recognized that like excitement, that spark when you're texting someone and oh, I don't know what to say. I want to be so funny, but clever. And I want her to respond right away. And, yeah, we just like went into, probably a 9-month torrid love affair. And that really kind of gave me this sense of like, okay, well, like we're not going to be a thing, an official thing. But I decided to sign up for a website called Meetup. I think it's like all over the world. It's like meetup.com, and you can type in anything and it'll find a group of people
Yes.
who are getting together. So I think I literally typed in lesbian, and I found the Calgary lesbian meetup group. And I was so nervous, but I just went to this like coffee night at a cafe, and that kind of just, I made a couple friends who were also lesbians, and then I made a couple more friends, and then through that I ended up going to Pride, and that really like kicked off. It really helped me realize that like it made me realize that straight women enjoy sex with men and find men attractive, and that I should have known that my complete revulsion of it like maybe was an indicator. And yeah, I just kind of came out. I kind of had to come out again. And when I came out to my dad, he told me that he's okay with it as long as I promise that if the right man comes along, I'll consider it. And I sort of thought, like, okay, like, I don't think he's going to, but sure. Like that, I'll leave that on the table.
If that's the dance we have to dance.
Yeah, like, great. If he's there and I meet him and he's secretly a woman, then I'll you know, and my sister was like very involved. She married a Catholic man and was, you know, converted to Catholicism and was heavy into the church. And, you know, I kind of got the love the sinner, not the sin talk, and that she loved me and would pray for me and just wanted me to be happy. And my mom told me that it was fine. So she was dating. She wasn't actually remarried, but she had been dating. And because she told me, it's fine, but you can't judge me for like dating younger men or something. Like she said, so it's like it always had to be conditional. It with my whole family, it was conditional. Like my dad would accept me if, and my mom would accept me if, you know, and my sister would love me, but, and it was kind of like, it's so, you know, I love my family and I really do think they did the best with what they could, with what they had. And they're, you know, giving it their darndest. And, you know, my dad passed away last year and he really came around. He really embraced, I think I really challenged his perception of gender norms, because he would ask, he'd say like, well, like, which one of you, you know, like would consider yourself the man? And I'd be like, well, neither, because we're lesbian. You know, like he would ask in a very, you know, he wanted to know and he wanted to understand, you know, and like, you know, bless his heart, he really tried. And yeah, I mean, now.
And where are you today?
Like today, like I'm just so stinking happy with my life. You know, I have a partner who is amazing and who also like dated women and then married a man and had kids and then, you know, is now back to being a lesbian. And we have a house and we share 5 dogs and she has 2 kids and we just like love and we love our lives and we're just like doing life together.
I love your story. And boy, was that a journey between the 2 episodes. I mean, really, because it's really not just about sexual norms and sexuality and gender roles. You also had this intense experience being married. You could have been married to a woman, but being in a relationship that's narcissistic is above and beyond. Right? Or being in a relationship that's very dysfunctional and toxic, regardless of who you're married, it's a horrible experience to have to go through, which we slid over it. I'm sure we could do 3 episodes on just that, right?
Yeah. Over on my Patreon, I've got a 5-part episode.
Okay, so let's talk about that. So where can people, I have a couple of things I want to do to wrap this up. Where can people learn more about your story? Because I'd like to think that there's one person that's listening that's like, wow, this is a little too close for comfort for me. Like, this is my story. Where can they find more information about this and you?
Yeah. So I have a podcast. It's called I Did Not Sign Up for This. And it really did spark from like, I did not sign up for that. And what I do is I find everyday people and I interview them and listen to stories of what they didn't sign up for. And I think, you know, even broader than my own story, each episode is so unique and yet I think everybody can relate to a piece of somebody's story. And I think that really helps people feel less alone because, you know, you may not have the exact same experience, but you're like, wow, I found that same thing.
Yeah.
And then, you know, for my own personal story, you know, I go into a lot more detail on my Patreon, partly because it is like, you know, a safety concern. You know, I don't want to give out too many details and, you know, stir up the devil. So I've got it over on my Patreon, which is just, I did not sign up for this. And that's where I share a lot of my own stories. And yeah, it helps obviously support my show. And yeah.
For someone who's listening, who maybe they're not fitting in and they're not belonging in their family, it doesn't have to do with their sexual orientation or gender roles or anything of that nature, but yet they resonate with the story because they were raised in a family where they just never felt that they fully could be embraced in their wholeness. What kind of advice would you want to give to that person?
Yeah, I think where my passion really comes is talking to people who have the ability to change this next generation. Or, I think if we just stopped and asked ourselves why success and belonging is so tied to these societal standards of, like I said, it doesn't have anything to do with being queer, but I mean, it's also, and, career and school and where you live. And if you buy a house versus rent, and who's to say that the, single person with 3 cats renting an apartment who's a barista at a coffee shop isn't just as worthy of the title of success and happiness, because they are doing what they love and they wake up happy and therefore spread joy to their world. Why isn't that just as celebrated or just as looked at as success? Like I remember as a kid being told, like, oh, if you don't go to school, you're going to flip burgers at McDonald's your whole life. But like, why isn't that okay?
I love it. And I think it's so important. I have a freshman in college right now. I wasn't sure if he was going to choose to go to college. And I say that very intentionally. We gave him the choice. What's going to make you happy? We had been through enough experiences with both of our teenagers. It's a very hard time to raise teenagers. I know you guys have 2 kids. It's a tough time. And we came to the realization long before I think a lot of other people did, which was nothing's really more important right now than my child's mental health and emotional health. Mm-hmm. And what is going to make them tick? What is going to make them want to wake up and embrace the day and be excited and want to have a bucket that's so overfilling that they're giving back in ways that they couldn't comprehend, that it's just a natural flow of life versus being an excellent sheep and fitting in all of the norms and checking off all of the boxes and standing in the line and doing the way you're supposed to do because that's what's seen as successful. He has chosen the path of college, and I think that's a great path for him because he is very social and he is very independent and he's very autonomous, and it gives him the ability to explore this kind of independence in a way that's really productive for him. I think it's great. I think if he chose to stay at home and work, he would not have been nearly as happy. Right? Because he doesn't really want to be home. He really wants to, he's a wanderlust. He wants to really launch and figure out this thing called life. I think for him, high school, middle school was like a coffin, literally. He felt so trapped, I think, in this norm, and he doesn't learn the way everybody else learns. He's really an out of the box thinker. And every single time he tried getting inquisitive and curious and out of the box, whatever school setting he was in would just slap his hand and tell him to get back in the box.
Yeah.
Right. And so we realized really quickly that graduating from X high school and having X high school degree, and he got all of those things, but like those things became icing on the cake for us.
Right.
Whereas other people are like, well, of course you're going to do that. What do you mean you wouldn't do that?
Yeah.
And so we had this perspective in parenting of mental health, emotional health first, because that nothing's more important than you feeling as though you belong here and that you connect and that you have purpose and that you're meaningful and that you're important to be here. Yeah. And once you can feel that, embrace it and accept it, what do you want to do in your life?
Yeah.
What's going to bring you joy? And you're right.
Yeah.
There are thousands of roles to fill. What if you just love serving people by way of a goddamn burger and a bun? Like, who's to say that's not happy? And when my kids were really little, I can't remember the exact quote, but I'll find it and put it in the show notes. I had seen this poster of John Lennon. And it was a quote that said, my teacher asked me what I want to be in life when I grow up. And I said, I want to be happy. And she said, you're missing the point. And he said, no, you're missing the point.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I think I challenge people who have any age in their life, but even looking at kids as young as 2, 3, 5.
Agreed.
We've really changed our language. We don't say when you get married. We say if you decide to get married, if you choose to get married. We don't say when you have kids. We say, if you decide to have kids, if you want kids, because it is absolutely legitimate and perfectly okay to not want to be married, to not want to have kids, to not want to own a car, to not want, and I think that really, I think of myself, if I take myself and think if 5-year-old Carling, instead of being called a flirt and told, oh, boys are going to love you, what boys do you like? I started that young imitating my peers around me who maybe were also imitating peers around them. Instead of, well, first of all, let's stop sexualizing kids. But
100%. This is what programming, we hear this more and more. We've been programmed. And, for anybody that's really interested, 2 great books on this are the 4 Agreements. And there's one now called The Fifth Agreement by Don Miguel Ruiz, which is really about, not making these assumptions, being very impeccable with your language and your word. And, I've always taken that approach with my kids of never making an assumption. Even if it came to dating or whatever. Oh, is there anybody that you have any interest in? Do you have any interest in dating? And I would just keep it at that. Right.
Yeah.
And the thing is I know where I am. I'm in a very metropolitan area. I'm within an hour of New York City. I mean, God forbid I slip and say something that would be like a standard norm from the 80s. My kids rip my head off.
Yeah.
They're like, well, what makes you think that person even likes a girl? I mean, maybe they're non-binary. Maybe you don't even know what they like.
Yeah.
And by the way, they are they. And I was like, okay, I'm getting schooled 24/7. I'm being slapped on the wrist and I'm pretty progressive, but I grew up with my own programming just of language. Right.
And we can only do our best until we know better. And then we can.
And it just becomes more of our norm. But, yeah, I just think this is great. And I just really hope that anybody that's listening that has just really been challenged with not feeling happy, not feeling content because they don't feel anything they've ever done is enough. What I would say is this is not about what you do. It's not what you produce. It's about who you are. And every single person who is here on this earth, who was born, has a reason, has a purpose, has meaning. The life is a better world because you're in it. And it's okay that you haven't found the reason why, right? We go back to that why you are here, but it's not about what you do. It's about who you are and the light that you can shine in the world. Because really, at the end of the day, we talk about purpose. The purpose is just to connect. That's the general purpose. Everything above and beyond that, it's a distraction.
Yeah.
Right? So I just want to thank you so much. We had such a great conversation. I want to remind people this is part 2 of a 2-part interview series. You do not want to miss part 1. We really began unpacking all the good stuff in part 1. with Carlene Middlestead. And it was such a great interview. We went into part 2 where she really took us from midlife to today. And thank you. I really loved having you on. If you guys want to know more about Carlene's story, you can go to her Patreon and you would find it at I did not sign up for this. And you can also learn more about her and her podcast, which I actually was also a guest on, which was great.
Yes.
Called I Did Not Sign Up for This. So thank you so much for being my guest today. It was really a great conversation.
Oh gosh, thank you. I think what you are doing is so important, and we just need to have these conversations.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. If you guys enjoyed this episode, you can tune in and subscribe to Flip That Shit to hear every episode. You'll be notified when it drops. You can find it on YouTube or wherever you find your podcasts. Have a great day.